Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone, and a very special welcome as we jump into the fifth part of our ongoing Arthashastra series.
It's great to be back. We've covered a lot of ground already, and today, well, we're really getting into the nuts and bolts of Kautilya's vision.
Exactly. We're going to be digging deep into some foundational aspects, governance, the economy, statecraft, military strategy, all as laid out in the Arthashastra.
Yeah, we've got quite a range of source material lined up. We'll be looking at excerpts discussing, well, everything from the ruler's role in justice and resource management,
To the state-controlled economy, the treasury, revenue collection.
the king and court's role in the justice system, again, customs regulations, trade, economic regulation, and the military's function, too. It's a lot.
It is a lot. So our mission for this deep dive is, as always, to try and extract the most compelling, the most insightful bits from all of that.
To give you a concise but hopefully really illuminating understanding of the Arthashastra's core principles in these, frankly, crucial areas.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Let's get started. Where should we begin? Maybe with justice and the ruler's role? That seems pretty central.
Absolutely. The core idea here really is the ruler as this fundamental protector, not just of the law, but of the people through the law.
So it's this balance, right?
Uh-huh.
Power, yes, but power that's only legitimate if it's used fairly for the public good.
Precisely. Kautilya suggests the ruler's real strength comes from, upholding that legal framework fairly. It's about safeguarding citizens.
And it's interesting that the king isn't above the law himself in this framework.
Not at all. That's key. The king must adhere to the law impartially. His legitimacy is tied directly to maintaining order and ensuring fair execution of those laws. It's not about personal preference.
It's about what society needs.
Mhm.
And the king's justice itself is supposed to be what? Wise, decisive.
Wise, decisive, and crucially above reproach, beyond suspicion. The goal is always maintaining order and making sure justice actually prevails.
Which leads back to that idea of public welfare being the primary goal, doesn't it?
It really does. Kautilya sees an efficient, just legal system as the bedrock for protecting citizens from injustice, from exploitation.
And he talks about specific welfare laws. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it means laws weren't just about prohibiting bad behavior. They were actively designed to help people prosper. They addressed individual rights, sure, but also regulated social, economic, even moral issues, all aiming for that public good.
That's quite a holistic view. So promoting justice was an active thing.
Definitely. Fairness, protecting the weak, punishing the guilty, and quite remarkably, regular reviews of the legal system to ensure it was still working properly.
That emphasis on review is pretty forward-thinking, and this all fed into a structured judicial system.
Oh, highly structured, not chaotic at all. It was administered by a detailed bureaucracy, clear roles, clear processes.
So you had different levels of courts.
Exactly, a hierarchy. Local tribunals for smaller stuff, then higher courts, often public, maybe with multiple judges.
And the king stepped in for the really major cases.
Yes, for the most significant ones, it was like a pyramid of justice, escalating upwards.
And the judges themselves? How were they chosen?
Based on qualifications, deep legal knowledge, but just as importantly, on integrity. Ethical conduct was paramount.
That if they messed up, if they were corrupt.
Severe consequences. Fines, dismissal, maybe worse. The system demanded integrity.
And we even see specialized courts.
We do. Courts for land disputes, trade issues, criminal matters, staffed by experts in those areas. It shows a sophisticated understanding, really.
Which we still see today, of course, and trial procedures aimed for transparency.
Yes, partly for fairness to the accused, but also to prevent corruption within the system. Public hearings make it harder to hide things.
And the investigations sound quite thorough. Witnesses, evidence, spies.
Spies were definitely part of it, yes. Kautilya emphasized thorough investigation, using witnesses, physical evidence, and his intelligence network, but also, crucially, verifying that evidence.
Okay, so the trial itself. Judge hears both sides, defendant presents their case, punishment fits the crime. Standard principles.
Pretty much. Impartial hearing, chance to defend oneself, punishment based on severity. The goal was truth and justice, according to the law.
Now let's talk more about those spies. Their role in justice seems quite prominent.
It really is. Kautilya saw them as essential for detecting hidden crimes, ensuring justice was served, especially if evidence was hard to come by. They were almost like judicial investigators, in a way.
So uncovering corruption, investigating crimes, catching lawbreakers, even powerful ones.
Absolutely. It sounds quite proactive, maybe even a bit intrusive by our standards, but it was about upholding the law rigorously.
And they also acted as moral oversight, watching the officials.
Yes, gathering intelligence on officials, including judges, and reporting corruption or unethical behavior straight to the king. Another layer of accountability.
Okay, so a complex system. What about the crimes themselves and the punishments? Kautilya goes into detail there too, right?
He does. A wide spectrum, from minor things up to serious threats against the state. Proportionality seems to have been a key idea.
What kinds of crimes stand out?
Well, theft and fraud were serious, especially by merchants or artisans. Dishonesty there really hit the economy. Penalties could be severe.
And corruption, as we mentioned.
Seen as extremely serious, especially for officials. High ethical standards were expected. Punishments could range from heavy fines to exile, even death. It was a major breach of trust.
And offenses against the state itself. Treason, rebellion.
Those were considered the absolute worst, naturally. They threatened the whole kingdom. Punishments were correspondingly harsh death or other severe penalties.
So the punishment system overall,
Mm-hmm.
it was based on severity, maybe the offender's status,
Right.
and aimed at deterrence.
Exactly. Deterrence and maintaining social order were the main goals.
So for minor things, maybe fines, confiscation.
Yes, fines and confiscation were common for lesser offenses, like unfair merchant practices, served as punishment and maybe some compensation.
But for more serious crimes,
Kautilya describes corporal punishment, flogging, even amputation for things like violence or significant corruption. It reflects the legal thinking of the time.
a harsh reality,
Yeah.
and capital punishment.
Reserved for the most severe crimes, treason, serious rebellion, murder. Methods like beheading are mentioned. It was a system focused squarely on maintaining order.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about resource management and the economy. It sounds like the state was heavily involved.
Very heavily involved. It was a pragmatic approach, really, focused on using state control over critical sectors to ensure the population's welfare.
So natural resources, land, water, forests were key.
Absolutely fundamental. Kautilya emphasizes careful regulation. They were vital for agriculture, obviously, but also for the military, for infrastructure projects.
And land was the most important.
By far. The state was active in making sure it was used efficiently and protected.
And the state collected revenue from it.
Yes, land revenue was primary. The king was seen as the ultimate landowner. Taxes, either in kind, a share of crops, or cash, were based on land quality and productivity.
And water management. Irrigation.
Crucial. The state took responsibility for building and maintaining canals, wells, and other irrigation works, essential for agriculture.
What about forests? Were they just wild areas?
No, strictly regulated. They provided timber, medicinal plants, other resources. The state often had a monopoly on forest products, ensuring sustainable use and profits for the treasury.
And other resources. Metals, spices, textiles.
Also regulated. Precious metals, valuable trade goods, the state controlled or taxed this trade, both for revenue and to influence the economy.
Which brings us neatly to taxation and revenue collection. Sounds like a sophisticated system for the time.
It really was. Kautilya understood it was essential for stability, funding everything the state did. But he aimed for fairness and efficiency, not crushing the population.
What kinds of taxes were there?
A whole range. Agricultural taxes on land and crops were major, commercial taxes on trade within the kingdom, plus import-export duties.
Anything else?
Excise taxes on things like alcohol or luxury items, maybe property taxes on homes and businesses.
And where did this money go? Was it just for the king?
No, Kautilya is clear it was for public benefit. Funding infrastructure, roads, irrigation, but also things like public welfare, maybe health, education, and of course the military and administration.
How was it administered? Were there checks and balances?
Yes, high officials, the Amatyas, oversaw collection. But there were systems of accountability audits, supervision to fight corruption and ensure efficiency. Fairness, transparency, efficiency, those were the guiding principles.
Now, one of the really striking things is this idea of state-controlled monopolies. That's quite different from a free market idea.
Absolutely. Kautilya believed certain key industries were just too important to leave to private hands. Things like mining, salt production, weapons manufacturing.
Why those specifically?
Control meant stable prices for essentials like salt, a guaranteed supply of weapons for the military without relying on private dealers, and direct state revenue from valuable resources like metals. It prevented hoarding, too.
So salt was heavily taxed and controlled.
Yes. Production and distribution were under state control. Same for weapons. State-run manufacturing meant independence. Mining was carefully managed to benefit the state treasury. And we also see state-run granaries and storage.
Ah, for managing food supply, preventing famine.
Exactly. Storing surplus acted as a buffer against disasters and helped stabilize the economy by managing supply and demand.
But private trade still existed alongside these monopolies.
Oh, yes. Trade and commerce were seen as vital, just, heavily regulated for the state's benefit. It wasn't about stopping trade, but guiding it.
How was internal trade regulated?
Through regulated markets, licenses for merchants, often organized guilds, there were taxes, quality standards, price controls to prevent exploitation.
And external trade, with places like Persia, Greece.
Very important. It brought in luxury goods, textiles, spices. The state protected trade routes, taxed foreign merchants, and generally facilitated this commerce, ensuring security for caravans and ships. It's a remarkably comprehensive economic vision.
It really is. Okay, so let's dive into the Treasury itself. The nitty-gritty of revenue budgeting accounts audit sounds complex.
It is detailed, and Kautilya places immense importance on it. That quote, all state activities depend first on the treasury, says it all. Wealth, kosa, equals power, danda.
He even says the Treasury is more important than the army.
He does, the logic being wealth can buy an army. So the king needed tight control over both finances and the military. Accumulating wealth was critical.
And if someone caused a loss to the Treasury?
Punishments often involve not just a fine, but full reimbursement, sometimes multiple times over. It shows how seriously they took protecting state funds. Kautilya lists many ways to increase state wealth. Things like profitable state enterprises, good policies, stopping theft and corruption, boosting agriculture and trade, avoiding calamities, managing tax exemptions carefully, increasing cash income.
And conversely, things that reduced wealth obstruction, misuse, false accounting, looting were obviously bad.
Absolutely detrimental. A well-managed treasury was seen as essential for the state's vitality.
He even planned for calamities affecting the Treasury, like misappropriation or looting.
Yes, he identified these risks: corruption, unjustified tax breaks, bad accounting, losses in war.
And had contingency plans.
Remarkably, yes. Things like maintaining a secret reserve treasury near the border and even allowing households to store essentials that could be requisitioned in emergencies. Very forward-thinking risk management.
Proper management of income and spending was key then.
Crucial for long-term stability. Meticulous financial administration was paramount.
So where did all this revenue actually come from? Book 2 is the main source, you said.
Primarily, yes, though mentions are scattered throughout. There are classified lists covering crown enterprises, taxes, tolls, service charges, fines, various resources.
You see lists for specific departments like the superintendent of warehouses or revenue from the countryside.
Exactly. Multiple lists, sometimes overlapping, giving different perspectives on income streams.
And the account books classified things. Taxes, fees, service charges, that transaction tax viaggi.
Yes, clear classifications. Plus, specific focus on key sectors like mining, metalworking, coinage, salt.
The chancellor handled rural revenue, including payments in kind, pratikara, crops, gold, labor, vishti.
Correct. Plus, details on tax exemptions, parihara, and even providing soldiers instead of tax, ayutthaya. Special emergency dues, Bali too.
What about miscellaneous income?
Lots of things. Lost property, intestate property, treasure troves.
Yeah.
Even savings from efficient spending were counted as revenue.
And fines, obviously.
Yes, fines for breaking rules were another distinct income source. It seems almost everything could potentially contribute.
But you mentioned these lists might be more like cheat sheets for officials than sophisticated economic analysis.
That's how it seems. They're practical aids, not always clearly distinguishing between a tax, a fee, or profit. You often have to infer the exact nature from the context.
Which must have made budgeting tricky. How do you predict income from treasure troves?
Exactly. And fines, while bringing in money, were mainly about enforcing laws and protecting revenue, not just padding the treasury. Kautilya actually condemned excessive surcharges on fines.
And fees for things like passports or ferries were more about cost recovery.
Likely, yes. Recovering the expense of providing the service, rather than major profit centers.
So boiling it down, the main revenue streams were
Basically fourfold: income from state property, like land, profits from state-controlled activities, manufacturing, leisure, taxes, cash in kind, and state trading profits.
And Kautilya even had plans for boosting revenue after, say, a war.
He did. Special temporary taxes, encouraging extra crops, asking for voluntary contributions, selling honors.
Some sound a bit more controversial. Expropriating temple property, exploiting gullibility.
Yes, those are mentioned, though often with caveats. Expropriating temple property excluded learned Brahmins. Exploiting gullibility or even cheating methods were suggested primarily against traders and the wicked, presented almost as necessary evils in extreme situations, ideally without the king appearing responsible. It's very pragmatic, sometimes ethically dubious by modern standards.
And villages had their own income too. Grazing fees, fines.
Yes, local communities had independent sources alongside the central government's revenue.
Okay, digging deeper into crown property income. Agriculture, Sita, was key. Direct cultivation and leasing.
Yes, revenue came from state-run farms, production minus costs, and leased land, state got a share, varying based on who supplied inputs, plus water rates for irrigation.
And mining metallurgy, huge importance.
Absolutely critical. Revenue from selling stones and metals, plus leasing mines for royalties or fixed payments, highlighted as a core source of wealth and power.
What about irrigation works? Fish, ducks, vegetables?
Yes. Income from resources in or near state reservoirs, and forests provided revenue through dues, direct sales of timber, etc., and output from forest-based state factories.
And state-controlled activities, textiles, salt.
Generated net revenue from sales minus costs, plus lease rents on salt pans and duties on salt. Even alcohol production, state-run or private under license, brought in revenue through sales, taxes, duties, fees.
Even leisure. Courtesans, gambling.
Yes, establishments involving courtesans were taxed, with detailed accounts required, overseen by a chief controller. Gambling winnings were taxed at 5%, managed by another controller.
Wow. And the list of actual taxes. Customs, transaction tax, share of produce, cash tax, prodakara, in-kind labor tax, prodakara, road cess, monopoly tax, royalties. It's extensive.
Very. Specific rates are mentioned for some, like customs. Explanations are given for how taxes like the transaction tax worked in relation to weights and measures. Payment often possible in cash or kind.
What about trade income, state trading profits?
Yes, the state aimed for profit on its monopolies, managed by a chief controller focused on marketing, buffer stocks, and avoiding excessive prices. Transaction taxes applied here, too. Exports were considered based on national advantage.
Compensation payments, what were those?
Paid to authorized merchants selling crown goods at fixed prices, basically compensating them for the lost opportunity to sell their own goods more profitably. The state also captured extra value from open bidding on certain goods.
And then all the fees and service charges. Weights and measures, passports, ferries, ports, land surveys, coining, testing, escorts.
The list goes on. Revenue from temples via special levies, recovery from thieves, interest on loan commodities, aid from foreign kings, presents, compensatory payments, prisoner redemptions.
Property reverting to the state disputed, unclaimed, intestate. Debts owed to the state.
All potential income streams. State debts had priority in bankruptcy. Foreign affairs brought tributes or treaty payments, unforeseen receipts, confiscated property, and savings from expenditure, too.
And fines, categorized by who levied them. Department heads, judges, other servants.
Yes, danda, athaya, ayukta danda, all contributing.
And those special levies in hard times. Extra taxes on farmers, merchants, craftsmen, even brothel keepers.
Yes, one-time measures. Direct state cultivation was another emergency measure. Voluntary contributions, selling honors.
Expropriating temple property, except learned Brahmins, and those ethically questionable methods of exploiting gullibility or cheating aimed mainly at traders.
Those are the extreme last resort options detailed.
Okay, let's talk budgeting, accounts, audit. Sounds like they had a system.
A surprisingly structured one. The chancellor estimated revenue by source, totaled it up. Actual revenue was tracked, current, delayed, minus expenses, exemptions, etc. Outstanding revenue was also monitored.
So income, expenditure, balance,
Yeah.
all tracked.
Yes. Actual income, current, transferred, miscellaneous like recoveries, savings, profits. Actual expenditure, budgeted, unbudgeted, daily, periodic. Net revenue calculated.
And the accounts themselves, detailed.
Incredibly, every entry dated. Revenue classified by heads. Cost price, share, transaction tax, monopoly, fixed, manufacturing, fines. Expenditure also classified. Worship, royal household, admin, foreign affairs, storage, manufacturing, labor, defense, cattle, forests, consumables.
And accounts officers had strict duties. Legible books, no corrections, timely submission.
Yes, with penalties for failures, specific rules for transaction accounts, remittances, and audits if delayed.
And the audit process, who was responsible?
Account officers had to be present with books, ready when called, no lying penalties applied. Auditors had to be ready 2 penalties for their negligence. High officials faced the highest penalties for inconsistent or false accounts. It's quite rigorous.
Okay, let's circle back briefly to the king and court in the justice system, building on what we said earlier. The king as the ultimate guarantor.
Absolutely. The ultimate protector, ensuring the state functioned legally and ethically. Chief lawgiver, chief enforcer.
Guardian of the law, just, wise, impartial, protecting everyone, no one above the law. Informed by spies, appointing judges.
Exactly. And beneath him, that structured system of courts and officers chosen for integrity and skill.
We mentioned the types. Village judges for local issues, regional for more complex cases, royal judges, often with the king, for major matters, all expected to be ethical.
Right. And the legal procedures were designed for consistency and fairness. Evidence and witnesses were key.
Witness credibility was scrutinized, false testimony punished.
Yes. Physical evidence was important too, especially in theft or violence cases. There are even hints of basic forensic thinking. Confessions mattered, but torture was regulated, suggesting awareness of potential abuse.
The trial process itself involved careful questioning, distinguishing between civil, fairness, compensation, and criminal punishment cases.
Correct.
And punishments, again, fines, corporal punishment, capital punishment for the most serious threats, plus exile and imprisonment, all aimed at order and deterrence.
That's the essence of it.
And that concept of dharma underpinning it all, righteousness, moral law.
Crucial. Justice had to align with dharma fair. Just, moral. Everyone treated fairly regardless of status. The king led by example. It infused the whole system.
Fascinating. Now let's shift to customs and trade in more detail. Sounds like another area of sophisticated regulation.
Very much so. Trade, commerce, customs vital for resource management and welfare in the Mauryan era. Part of that framework for order, prosperity, fairness.
Goods were classified by origin, countryside, city, foreign, and duties applied.
Yes, duties on import-export into the city funded the treasury and regulated markets.
And some goods were duty-free for weddings, rituals.
Exactly. Things for specific social or religious purposes, weddings, gifts, rituals, worship. Also beneficial items like rare seeds at the controller's discretion. Didn't want to hinder culture or religion.
And some goods were prohibited entirely. Imports or exports.
Yes, things impacting state security or the economy.
Prohibited exports like weapons, metals, grain, chariots for security.
Likely, yes. Didn't want to strengthen potential enemies.
And prohibited imports.
Yay.
Harmful or useless goods.
Right. To protect public health, security, the economy, maybe even cultural norms.
How were foreign goods handled? Inspection, duties, records.
Carefully monitored at city gates. Caravans inspected. Goods classified by value. Merchants paid duties to the chief collector. Transactions recorded. Merchant, origin, quantity.
And sold via public bids, with extra going to the treasury.
Often, yes. Ensured transparency and fair market value, plus extra revenue for the state.
What about selling prohibited goods? Could they be sold at all?
Generally not allowed in the city, maybe sold outside duty-free, kept illicit trade in check.
And laws for agents selling goods for others. Accountability.
Yes, agents were responsible for fair handling, getting proceeds to the owner, liable for losses due to negligence, though reputable dealers weren't liable for totally unforeseeable losses.
Consumer protection seems like a real theme, especially with artisans and traders.
Definitely. Significant concern there.
Particularly goldsmiths. High standards, warnings about fraud.
Yes, the text shows detailed knowledge of how goldsmiths might cheat. Prohibitions on false balances, substitution, had to return exact amount minus natural loss. Chemical tests encouraged.
And guilds provided guarantees, covered losses.
Yes, guilds enforced regulations, quality, timeliness, compensated for loss or death of entrusted items, self-regulation backed by the state.
And other services, repairers, weavers, held responsible for damage.
Yes, similar principles applied. Couldn't damage or lose goods entrusted to them.
Even doctors and entertainers are regulated.
To some extent, authorities informed of risky treatments. Entertainers advised against travel in rainy season. Broad oversight.
It really paints a picture of the state being deeply involved in the economy.
Absolutely. Which brings us to elaborating on that state role in economic regulation overall.
Right, ensuring prosperity, stability, direct control over trade, production, markets, balancing state needs and citizen welfare.
We see it in trade regulation licensing for merchants to prevent monopolies or unfair practices.
Control over essential commodities, grain, metals, spices, to prevent hoarding, inflation.
Exactly. Keeping prices stable and supply reliable.
And those market inspectors, markatas, ensuring fair transactions, weights, stopping illicit trade.
Yes, maintaining market integrity and consumer confidence.
Taxation policies, again, central tool, efficient, fair, funding state activities, but reasonable.
And the types elaborated land tax, based on productivity. Trade commodity taxes may be progressive, higher on luxury, even a wealth tax on assets, and a poll tax for non-agri-trade folks.
Collection system.
Mm,
Efficient, transparent, fair. Collectors chosen on merit, trustworthy. Corruption discouraged, maybe some discretion allowed.
that seems to be the ideal, yes. Plus measures against evasion spies, local officials monitoring.
Infrastructure was critical too, wasn't it, for the economy?
Hugely. Well-maintained road networks connecting everywhere were vital for trade.
And rest stops along the way for merchants.
Yes, providing amenities and security to encourage long-distance commerce.
Currency and banking.
Yeah.
Stable coinage, encouraging lending.
Key elements: state-minted coins for reliability, encouraging lending, and credit to finance ventures.
And foreign trade and diplomacy went hand in hand.
Essential for prosperity. Good relations with neighbors encouraged.
Trade treaties for mutual benefit. Market access, protecting merchants.
Yes, and foreign merchants welcomed, provided they followed laws and paid taxes.
Exporting luxuries like gems, textiles, spices for revenue.
A significant part of the strategy, an outward-looking approach.
Okay, one last major area, the military. Clearly essential in Kautilya's statecraft.
Absolutely vital, not just for war, but for control, law enforcement, protecting people and resources, linked directly to political stability and economic prosperity.
And it was highly organized.
Very. A well-organized, disciplined military was the cornerstone of power, an elaborate structure.
Infantry, Pajapati's backbone.
Yeah.
Cavalry, Ashvayoda, for mobility, reconnaissance.
Exactly. Infantry trained in combat, cavalry highly valued for speed and surprise, flanking, disrupting formations, rigorous training.
Chariots, Ratha for breaking lines, archery platforms. Elephants, Gaja, for shock value, causing chaos.
Yes, elephants were crucial for trampling forces, trained to hit weak points. Chariots used strategically.
And even special forces.
Yeah.
Vidyat Pradarsaka. For espionage, sabotage.
Likely, yes. Covering espionage, sabotage, psychological warfare, detailed management needed to coordinate it all.
But training wasn't just physical. Moral, tactical, spiritual elements.
Right. Moral training focused on loyalty, morale, duty, discipline, rewards for courage. Tactical education covered strategy, formations, terrain use. Leaders needed to be adept.
Spiritual discipline for mental toughness.
Yeah.
And training in espionage.
Yes, mental techniques for calmness, controlling fear, and espionage training was vital, given the focus on intelligence gathering.
Defense was also key. Fortifications.
Absolutely. Protecting borders, cities, strategic points, strong fortifications were essential. Walls, moats, watchtowers, gates, placed strategically near resources, high ground.
And maintained regularly.
Yes, regular inspections, skilled engineers involved, underground tunnels, secret passages mentioned too.
Defensive tactics included specific formations, guerrilla warfare, using intelligence.
All mentioned. Defensive formations for sieges, small mobile units for harassment, and always using spies for intelligence on the enemy.
But offensive war wasn't ruled out. Expansionism was a legitimate policy.
Yes, after securing borders and stability, war was seen as a tool for political objectives, attacking weaker neighbors, using alliances, diplomacy alongside force, a very pragmatic, realpolitik view.
And using mercenaries was okay.
Yes, to supplement forces, create a diverse army. It's a comprehensive picture of the military integrated into statecraft.
It certainly is. It seems crystal clear from these texts he wasn't just a symbol. He was absolutely key.
Totally pivotal, yeah.
His main job was the well-being, the security of everyone in the kingdom, wasn't it?
Indeed. The sources really paint the king as the ultimate protector, and that wasn't just about, say, military power.
Right.
It went further, ensuring justice was administered fairly, keeping internal harmony, peace within the kingdom, and guarding against all kinds of threats. Internal, external didn't matter. And crucially, this protection, it was stressed, applied to everyone, regardless of their social standing.
That sounds like an incredibly demanding role.
Yeah.
I mean, the texts talk about needing wisdom, strength, constant vigilance. And like we said, that sharp mind, that strategic thinking.
Yeah.
It's almost like they wanted a leader who was part philosopher, part general, and, I don't know, part master strategist rolled into one.
That's a really good way to put it, actually. These qualities, which might seem contradictory sometimes, are brought up again and again. The king needed wisdom for sound decisions, strength to back them up, vigilance to see trouble coming.
And this sheer intelligence to navigate what must have been a pretty tricky political scene.
Exactly. That multifaceted requirement really highlights the huge weight of leadership, as Kautilya saw it.
There's also this recurring idea of the king as the father of his people.
Mm,
That feels like more than just a nice title,
mm.
right? It's just a real obligation, a sense of care.
Absolutely. That paternalistic view is, well, crucial to understanding the ruler-subject relationship he describes. It underlines the idea that the king's #1 concern should be his people's welfare. This bond, this sense of care and support, it's presented as the bedrock of stable, effective government. Kautilya basically suggests that happy people are loyal people.
Makes sense. Now, thinking about the state itself, Kautilya didn't just see it as, land and people. It's described almost like a living thing. What's that about?
Yeah, that organic analogy is quite powerful, isn't it? Seeing the state as a living organism, king as the head, administration as the limbs, it really emphasizes how interconnected everything is.
Oh, okay.
Every part has a job, and the state's overall health, its stability, depends on all those parts working properly. Under the king's direction, of course.
And a key part of this living organism is its sovereignty, I suppose. The basic idea that the state needs to be independent, in charge of its own fate.
Precisely. Keeping sovereignty is paramount. The texts constantly hammer home the dangers for a state that loses its independence. It becomes vulnerable, right, to attack from outside, instability inside.
So protecting that sovereignty is a core drive.
It's like a constant theme, yes, throughout Kautilya's work.
And to protect it, a strong military seems absolutely essential in his view.
Oh, definitely. The military is shown as indispensable, a key tool of state power. And its role wasn't just defense.
No?
It was also crucial for securing borders and even for, well, strategic expansion, if that was deemed necessary for the state's interests. A well-run, powerful military is seen as a fundamental pillar.
Okay, so you've got this powerful state, this central ruler. How was the day-to-day administration actually handled? It sounds like there's a pretty complex system.
Yes, Kautilya was big on structure. He laid out a highly organized bureaucracy. He pictured a system with lots of appointed officials called amatyas, think high-ranking administrators or ministers,
Right.
each one responsible for specific areas of government. It wasn't supposed to be messy or improvised. It was designed hierarchical.
So centralized power with the king, but he delegates specific tasks and authority to these officials. Is that the gist?
That's exactly it. The king is the ultimate boss, the final decision maker on anything really important. But for the state to actually work, he had to hand out specific jobs and the power to do them to these amatyas.
Okay.
That allowed for, efficient management across the whole kingdom.
And it wasn't just general management. They stressed specialization, too.
Mm-hmm.
Different departments for different things.
Precisely. The Arthashastra goes into detail about needing specialized governance. You find distinct departments for things like agriculture, trade, taxes, intelligence, we'll get to that, justice, diplomacy,
Wow.
each managed by people supposedly with expertise in that area. This division of labor, focusing on specialized knowledge, was seen as key for efficiency and effectiveness.
Now, considering some of the, let's say, pragmatic aspects of statecraft we're hinting at, it's interesting the sources also mention dharmic governance. That brings in a moral and ethical angle.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how Kautilya weaves dharma, which here means more than just religion. It's about duty, social order, the ethical principles for a stable, he weaves that together with a very practical, almost realpolitik approach to governing. It wasn't just about power for power's sake.
So strategy and force were needed, but they shouldn't totally ignore what's right or just.
That's the idea. While Kautilya definitely acknowledged you sometimes needed strategic, even forceful actions, he also stressed that the king should ideally be guided by ethical principles. Pure self-interest wasn't the goal. The ruler should aim for the state's long-term good, the people's good, even if it meant tough choices.
Okay.
This moral dimension was seen as vital for long-term stability, social harmony, and importantly, the ruler's legitimacy.
And the king himself had to set the tone, lead by example.
Absolutely. The ruler's personal conduct was seen as hugely important. If the king was unjust or seen as corrupt, that would eat away at people's trust and respect.
Could lead to trouble.
Exactly. Discontent, instability. So setting a righteous example was crucial for keeping social order, the moral fabric of the state.
And when laws were broken or disputes came up, the king was the final judge, making sure laws were followed and things were fair.
Yes. Ultimate responsibility for justice rested with the king. He had to ensure laws were enforced impartially, that justice was available to everybody. Failing that could really undermine the state's foundations.
It's interesting that even way back then, there seems to be an idea of punishment aiming for reform, not just revenge.
That's a sharp observation. The punishments described in the Arthashastra often seem designed not just to penalize lawbreakers, but also, where feasible, to encourage them to change, to rejoin society. It suggests a surprisingly, well, modern touch to justice in a way.
Okay, let's shift gears to something Kautilya is really known for: espionage. The texts seem to put a huge emphasis on intelligence gathering, both inside the kingdom and outside.
It's truly one of the most striking parts of his work. The sheer detail he gives to setting up and running a massive intelligence network. It's obvious he saw information as absolutely
A
vital.
key tool.
A key tool for effective governing, for national security, for making smart strategic moves.
And we're talking spies everywhere, right? Secret agents, informers. Sounds like a very watchful state.
Indeed. The texts carefully describe using different kinds of agents. Their job was to monitor pretty much everything, what ministers were thinking, how the general public felt, and crucially, spotting any early signs of rebellion, dissent, treason, anything that could threaten stability.
And this wasn't just inward-looking. There was an equal focus on foreign intelligence.
Exactly. Kautilya advised keeping a strong network of spies in neighboring kingdoms, even further afield. The main goal: get critical info on their armies, their economies, their political plans and alliances.
So the king could make informed foreign policy decisions, anticipate threats.
Precisely. And the detailed strategies for using moles, double agents, deception, it shows a very sophisticated level of strategic thinking for that time.
It really does. The Arthashastra gets into the nitty-gritty of recruiting, training, deploying people who could infiltrate enemy circles, gain trust, and send back crucial intelligence. That level of detail on spycraft is a real hallmark of Kautilya. Moving to how states should deal with other states. Diplomacy. The approach in these texts feels very pragmatic, focused on strategic gain rather than just ethics or old friendships.
You've nailed a core part of Kautilya's diplomatic thinking. It's firmly rooted in what we'd now call realpolitik. Ethics aren't totally ignored, but the main driver in foreign relations is the state's strategic interest, its long-term security.
Yeah.
It's basically about maximizing power and influence in a world where states have competing interests.
So making alliances wasn't necessarily about deep bonds or shared values, more like temporary deals based on mutual benefit.
That's often how it's presented, yes.
Yeah.
Alliances are frequently seen as tactical moves, made when they help the kingdom short-term or long-term. They could be pretty fluid, changing as the political map shifted.
And it sounds like using psychological tricks, stirring up trouble between enemies, using deception. These were all fair game in diplomacy.
Absolutely. Kautilya emphasizes using various methods strategically to manipulate opponents, create splits in their leadership, weaken their ability to threaten you. It's a proactive, often subtle approach to managing other states.
The texts even lay out 6 specific ways to conduct diplomacy. Can you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. Kautilya lists 6 main approaches: peacemaking treaties, war, active fighting, neutrality, staying out of others' conflicts, alliance, strategic partnerships, disunion, actively weakening rivals by knowing discord, and secret dealings, using covert ops for strategic goals.
Okay.
The wise ruler, he says, needs to pick the best option from these 6 depending on the situation and the state's overall aims.
Right, let's switch focus now to the economy. Kautilya's vision here seems quite different from, say, a hands-off, laissez-faire approach. The state seems heavily involved in managing the economy.
It is striking, especially compared to modern free market ideas. Kautilya strongly believed the state needed to be actively involved, regulating, guiding pretty much all economic activity.
Why?
He saw a stable, prosperous economy as absolute fundamental to the state's strength and stability and the people's well-being. And he believed the ruler had a direct responsibility to make that happen.
So the ruler wasn't just defender and judge. He was also basically the state's chief economic officer.
Exactly. The king as chief economic steward, responsible for creating a thriving economy. His success there was seen as directly boosting the state's power and his own legitimacy.
And to manage this, it seems the state kept a tight grip on key resources.
Yeah.
Land, minerals, precious metals.
Yes. State control over strategic resources was a cornerstone. This control let the government regulate prices, stop hoarding, and make sure these vital things were used mainly for the state's benefit.
There's also that interesting idea about wealth not getting too concentrated. the king playing a role in making sure it was used productively.
That's right. Kautilya seemed a bit wary of huge wealth gaps. He saw the king's role partly as a guardian of wealth, making sure it wasn't just piled up but actively invested, used in ways that helped the whole economy.
Looking at the specifics, trade, commerce, markets. Sounds like the state was firmly in charge there too.
Absolutely. Regulation was key. Kautilya knew trade was vital for wealth creation, but he believed markets needed strict, consistent oversight to prevent exploitation, keep things fair, ensure stability.
So things like licensing merchants, controlling trade routes, maybe even setting prices for essential stuff, all state functions.
Precisely. Licenses helped keep merchants accountable. Controlling routes let the state manage goods flow and maybe collect taxes. And price controls, especially on basics, aim to stop market manipulation and protect people from being ripped off.
And to make sure these rules were followed, you had market inspectors keeping an eye on things.
Yes, systematic market surveillance was crucial. These inspectors checked product quality, watched for fraud, enforced pricing rules. It helped create a sense of fair play, protecting both buyers and sellers.
Of course, running a state costs money. Taxation. What were the basic principles behind Kautilya's approach here?
He knew taxes were essential for revenue, obviously, but he also really stressed they had to be fair, balanced. They shouldn't crush economic activity or overburden the people.
We see mentions of taxes on trade, commerce, like customs duties on goods coming in or going out. Seems logical.
Yes, taxes on trade, internal and external, were a major income source. Customs duties not only brought in revenue, but could also be used strategically encouraging or discouraging certain trades, depending on state goals.
And the idea of proportional taxation, those who can afford more, pay more, that sounds quite modern, actually. Quite fair.
It does, doesn't it? Kautilya advocated for a system where the tax load generally matched someone's economic status, their ability to pay. He also warned against excessive taxes he thought that could lead to stagnation, unhappiness, even tax dodging.
And collecting the taxes was one thing, but managing that money efficiently was just as important.
Absolutely. Efficient collection by trained officials and careful management of state funds were vital for the state's fiscal health. Its ability to pay for everything: the army, infrastructure, public welfare.
Agriculture was obviously huge back then. How did Kautilya see its role and the state's involvement?
Agriculture was seen as the bedrock, the absolute foundation of the whole economy. Kautilya put huge emphasis on maximizing farm productivity and ensuring the sector was stable long-term.
And land revenue, a tax based on farm output, seems like a primary income source, often a percentage of the harvest.
Yes, the land revenue system, paying a portion of the yield, often around 1/6, though could vary, was a cornerstone of state finance. The rate could be adjusted based on land fertility, crops grown, things like that.
And the state didn't just tax farming, it actively invested in it, like building irrigation systems.
Exactly. Recognizing water was vital, the state invested heavily in building and maintaining irrigation canals, reservoirs, essential for consistent output, especially where rain was unreliable. The state also played a role in encouraging farming innovation, providing support to farmers' credit, relief during disasters, that sort of thing.
What about other kinds of work? Industry beyond farming, how did the state manage those?
Kautilya addressed labor and industries too. He aimed for a balance, really protecting workers, treating them fairly, while also promoting productivity and economic growth.
So encouraging skilled labor, maybe even state-run training programs, that was on the table.
Yes, developing a skilled workforce was seen as important for various industries. The state could help with training and education to boost skills, create a productive labor pool.
And there was an awareness about fair wages, decent conditions, protecting workers from exploitation.
Definitely. Kautilya's regulations had provisions for fair wages, reasonable working conditions, safeguards against exploitation. This wasn't just economic, ensuring a stable workforce, but also social, caring for citizens' well-being.
It's also interesting that the state might directly own key industries, like mining or weapons manufacturing.
Yes. State ownership of strategic industries gave the government direct control over essential supplies, allowed them to regulate prices in key sectors, and made sure these critical industries served the state's overall interests and security.
Okay, so all this economic activity, all the revenue, it flows into the state treasury.
Yeah.
How critical was the treasury in Kautilya's view?
Absolutely critical. The treasury was seen as the very foundation of state power, stability, its ability to survive long-term. A full, well-managed treasury provided the resources for everything: military campaigns, building projects, welfare, emergencies.
So keeping large reserves for bad times, economic downturns, or crises, that was essential planning.
Absolutely. Kautilya strongly emphasized having significant reserve funds, a financial cushion against unexpected shocks, natural disasters, economic slumps, whatever could strain state resources. This foresight, this prudent planning was seen as crucial for long-term security.
And like elsewhere, surveillance played a role. Spies keeping tabs on markets, finances.
Yes, mirroring other areas. Economic surveillance using spies and informants helped monitor market activities, detect fraud, or financial issues that could affect the Treasury.
Right. So we've covered a lot of ground. Let's circle back to those key traits of the ideal ruler we started with. Wisdom, vigilance, decisiveness, pragmatism.
Yeah.
It's really clear now how these weren't just abstract ideas. They had very practical applications everywhere we've looked.
Exactly. They're deeply tied to the nuts and bolts of running a state. Wisdom helps create good policies. Vigilance demands that spy network. Decisiveness is needed in war and administration. And pragmatism lets the ruler adapt, make smart strategic choices in a complex world.
And that structured state, the hierarchy, the different officials, chief minister, treasurer, military chiefs, intelligence head, each part played a vital role supporting the ruler, making the whole complex system work efficiently, like interconnected gears in a machine.
Precisely. That structure, with clear authority and defined jobs, was designed for efficiency. Every official, from top ministers to department heads, contributed to the state's function and stability, all under the king's ultimate authority.
The constant focus on justice and the rule of law is also striking. It seems like even with all the strategy and the spies, maintaining a just society was fundamental to the state being seen as legitimate.
Yes, justice was a cornerstone. Fair enforcement of laws, punishments that fit the crime, the idea equality before the law, all seen as crucial for social order, for people's trust, and ultimately for the state's legitimacy. Even the intelligence work, while maybe shadowy, was ultimately meant to uphold the law, prevent threats to justice and stability.
And revisiting trade and infrastructure, it's clear Kautilya saw a direct link between a booming economy and good roads, ports, transport networks. It's all connected.
Absolutely. Helping trade inside and outside the kingdom was seen as essential for prosperity. Investing in infrastructure roads, waterways, ports was vital for enabling that trade, moving goods and people, and strengthening the whole economic system.
Finally, those principles of managing public money responsibly, keep the treasury full, avoid too much debt, have emergency funds, it all points back to long-term security, the sustained well-being of the state and its people.
Exactly. Good fiscal management was paramount. A strong treasury, emergency reserves vital for resilience, for meeting people's needs consistently, even in hard times, fair, efficient taxes, plus careful spending and investment in public welfare, that was the foundation of financial stability.
So, wrapping up this deep dive into Kautilya, it really is remarkable how many of these ideas, though ancient, still echo today. The challenges in governing, in economics, that constant balancing act between power and justice, the need for a stable economy, vigilance, strategy, these are truly timeless issues.
Indeed. That intricate web connecting power, justice, and economic prosperity is just so central and enduring in Kautilya's work. And for you, listening, understanding these fundamental points offers, I think, a really valuable lens for looking at governance and economic policy today, even in our own complex world.
Thinking about Kautilya's intense focus on constant vigilance, on strategically using information, how might his basic principles apply to the challenges and maybe the opportunities of our own hyper-connected digital age? An age where information itself is such powerful currency and the lines between internal and external threats seem blurrier than ever. Definitely something interesting to ponder. Well, as we wrap up this particular deep dive into the Arthashastra's ideas on governance, economy, and military matters, it's just staggering, isn't it, the level of detail from so long ago?
It really is. We've touched on so much: that careful balance the ruler had to strike between power and justice, the surprisingly intricate state-controlled economy.
The incredible detail on revenue, taxation, accounting, the military's role beyond just fighting wars.
And that constant thread of needing ethical conduct, especially within the legal system, it's quite remarkable.
It definitely makes you think about how relevant, or maybe how differently we approach these fundamental principles of statecraft and societal organization today.
Absolutely. And perhaps a final thought for our listeners to ponder. Considering how the Arthashastra emphasizes both a strong, stable state and the welfare of its citizens, how do you think Kautilya might look at our world today?
How would he evaluate the balance we strike or fail to strike between those priorities now?
Exactly. A complex question with no easy answer, stemming right from this ancient text.
A great question to leave things on. We really hope this has given you more insight into the Arthashastra's complex wisdom. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.